It's been a few videos since I last talked about Blue Protocol Star Resonance, but I think a lot of people are at least curious what's going on in that part of the gaming sphere. And recently they released their Master Mode dungeons and their raids. So now Endgame is actually released and people are able to play it, which now begs the question, is Blue Protocol Star Resonance worth playing for the endgame, and what's the endgame actually like? MMOs live or die by what there is to do when you are done leveling. Whether that's cosmetics or endgame content or social experiences, all of those things are very important to the gameplay loop. So today I want to look at one of those things in particular, which is the raid and my first experience in that raid on the Western servers. My name is Braxophone, you can call me Brax, and today's video is sponsored by Blue Protocol Star Resonance. So quick shout out to them. If you're interested in any of what I'm talking about today, you can click the link down below to join me. So I mostly want to go over what the raid was actually like. For your reference, I have a lot of experience in a lot of other MMOs, including the raiding scenes and the hardcore raiding scenes. And without going into too much detail, I know what makes a fight difficult, and I can really appreciate a difficult fight that incorporates a whole team. Now, Star Resonance actually has 3 tiers of the raid: the normal, the hard, and the nightmare difficulty. And I was able to clear hard mode on day 1, and nightmare was not necessarily available for anyone to clear at this time. But we started off with the normal mode raid, and it wasn't too difficult, but there were a couple choke points that required you to know some of the mechanics. The thing is, the normal mode raids were meant to be more approachable to the casual player base, whereas someone that isn't as big into hardcore raiding can still get a good raiding experience. The normal mode has some different mechanics that include things like cooling down cannons, firing cannons at dragons on the sides, hot and cold temperatures that you need to alternate so you don't freeze, and a transition phase in the middle of the fight where you have to go down a path, not freeze to death, and break some walls. Now, all of these things exist in the hard mode as well, but the normal mode is a little less punishing about them, and they're a little less advanced. So you can make mistakes in the normal mode and clear pretty dang easily, especially in week 1 with week 1 gear, because the normal mode is not meant to be the pinnacle of challenging. However, it's harder than any of your normal dungeon runs. Either way, the normal mode experience I think was actually fine, because it did punish you if you did something wrong. I find that in a lot of games when you do normal raids, they tend to not be very difficult and not be very punishing unless you are really trying to die. And when you couple that system with the Blue Protocol Star Resonance's gear score system, it becomes very evident if you're undergeared, because you will take way more damage than you should. Now, that exists in a lot of other MMOs too, but if you have very good gear, it will save you from time to time when you could wipe out. Now, I did this on stream at twitch.tv/Brax, and it was a really good experience because I got to do it with a bunch of friends and guild members and viewers. So when everything mixed together, it was quite chaotic. There's a lot of AoEs that target onto random people, and a lot of people running around like headless chickens. We managed to beat the normal raid as a full guild, and it was just a super awesome experience. But if you want to know what my favorite experience was between the 2 raids, it was definitely the hard mode, and this is actually one I want to talk about a little bit more in depth. The thing with the hard mode was, if you didn't perform the mechanics correctly, it could punish not only you, but the entire raid. This is something that I would expect from a harder tier raid, because the challenge in raids isn't just from the individual responsibilities that you may have, it's from everyone coordinating all of those individual responsibilities to not affect the other players and allow everyone to continue to do their job until the boss is dead. Hard mode really is the perfect example of that, because you have a bunch of DPS players that are getting randomly targeted with AoEs above their heads that drop ice puddles, and if they drop on other players, it becomes a really big problem with those players accumulating more ice stacks. And when the bar above your head specifically gets completely full, or when you get to 20 ice stacks, then you freeze, and the other players will have to attack the icicle that you become to unfreeze you. Now, the catch here is that bar is continuously freezing up the entire fight. This happens in the normal mode and the hard mode, but in the hard mode, it's a lot more punishing. In the first phase, there will also be puddles of fire that spawn where you can cleanse your stacks of ice, but a lot of the time I felt like they were always very far away from the boss. And in order to optimize that, you could always use your double dash to dash there and back, but it was kind of difficult for some players to be able to do that. Either way, the entire fight you are balancing that mechanic while also worrying about the other mechanics on the outside, and those ones are also kind of hard to see unless you're intentionally looking towards the outside, which for me, I was kind of doing because I was trying to call the shots successfully, or rather unsuccessfully, I am unsure, but I think I did an okay job. Either way, there are 4 cannons, and you have to use those cannons to shoot the dragon adds on the side. However, if you use them too frequently, they will start to overheat, and so you have to point this frost beam laser from the main boss towards the overheating cannons, and those lasers are a pseudo tank buster where if other players stand in it, they will take a ton of damage. On top of that, there are randomly AoEs where a tank will have to stand in them to soak them, otherwise the raid will wipe. And sometimes you will actually get frozen by ice stacks while you're trying to run to that spot. So luckily we brought a couple tanks just in case. But essentially what I'm saying is that in the first phase alone, it kind of felt like a Mario Party minigame where if you messed up any of the button inputs, you actually just lost immediately. These raids have 20 people in them maximum, so it's not quite as coordinated as something tighter like an 8-man party or a 5-man party or a 4-man, and everyone has different responsibilities, but sometimes people just don't get the responsibilities. It's your job to know what your responsibility is, even if you don't consistently have the same one. And in my opinion, that's pretty good raid design if you're going to do big boss fights, because it keeps everyone on their toes and requires everyone to learn, and ideally, nobody's getting carried. Now, we know that's not entirely the case because there are times where people will just not get the hard mechanics, and then you won't wipe the raid because they didn't get the hard mechanics, and if they did get the hard one, then they would just mess it up and everyone would die. But because we did the raid day one when we were under geared and nobody was at the recommended gear score for the raid, it was a super enjoyable experience because we wiped a ton of times. We were going at the hard mode 4 hours and we ended up replacing 2 of our tanks with 2 extra DPS players just to try and meet DPS checks, which mattered a lot because after we got the 2 new DPS players, we split up the players based on gear score to try and make sure that both sides during the transition phase would have balanced damage, which was also important. I didn't end up talking about the hard mode transition phase, but in the hard mode, you actually have to split up into 2 groups of 10 down different paths. And if one group fails, the other group has to wipe. So it puts a lot more responsibility on players. Once both sides made it through that DPS check, though, you would make it to the second phase of the fight, and that was an absolute clusterfuck. There are ice puddles that if they drop on you and you stand in them, you get tethered and then you freeze really fast. There are barrels that you need to blow up using boss attacks in order to actually pop them and then reduce your ice stacks. And eventually towards the end, we ended up just trading bodies and trying to chain res to beat the boss, which was honestly really fun. I think one of my favorite things about challenging raid content and doing raid content early is that when it's new and nobody knows what they're doing, pushing that last few percent of boss HP is just an incredibly fun and rewarding experience. I don't think that these Blue Protocol Star Resonance raids that I did were the best raiding experience I've ever had, and honestly it's understandable since the game is so new. It'll take a little bit before they catch their stride with their content and start making the really good stuff, but either way, it was really fun to get together with a group of people and really push ourselves to do challenging team-based content where if one of us failed, we all failed. Because that same thing that can hold us back, one person failing that makes us all fail, is the same thing that makes it so rewarding when we all succeed at the end. Because when it comes down to it, right at the end of the fight, it might be 1 or 2 players left standing that bring home the win and meet that DPS check at the end, and I really enjoyed that part of the new Blue Protocol Star Resonance raids. So if you're kind of bored with the state of the other games you've been playing and you do want to try a new raid experience, Blue Protocol Star Resonance has a pretty unique one, and while I don't think it's perfect at the moment, I can tell that the vision is there and they want to make really engaging and fun raids. I think they took inspiration from some of my favorite MMOs that I've played, and I think if you're an MMO veteran, you also will feel the exact same thing. Digital server jank aside, it's a good experience, and I highly recommend you guys check it out. Anyways, if you guys did the raids, let me know what you think down below, and I'll catch you next time.